She had exactly $10.40 to her name. It was the only money she had to feed her little brother tonight. But when a shivering elderly stranger walked into the diner and his credit card was declined, Sarah Bennett made a choice that defied logic. She gave away her last lifeline. She thought she was just buying a coffee. She didn't know she was buying her future. 1 hour later, a fleet of black SUVs surrounded the diner, and the identity of that homeless man would bring the entire city to its knees. This is the true story of how a $10 kindness sparked a billion-dollar revolution. The wind off Lake Michigan didn't just blow, it bit. It gnawed through layers of wool and polyester, finding the skin and settling into the bone. Inside, Jerry's 24-hour diner, the heating vents were rattling, fighting a losing battle against the Chicago freeze. Sarah Bennett adjusted her name tag, her fingers trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the exhaustion that had settled deep in her marrow. She was 23 years old, but in the reflection of the stainless steel pie case, she looked 40. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes, and her ponytail was fraying at the edges. Table 4 needs a refill. Bennett, stop daydreaming, or clock out. The voice belonged to Rick, the night shift manager. Rick was a man who wore too much cologne and wielded his pitiful amount of power like a broadsword. He stood behind the counter, scrolling through his phone while wiping a grease spot that didn't exist. "On it, Rick," Sarah said, her voice raspy. She grabbed the pot of decaf and moved to table 4. 2 truck drivers were arguing about union dues. They didn't look up when she poured. They wouldn't tip. Sarah knew the math before the receipt even hit the table. She walked back to the station and discreetly checked her apron pocket. Her hand brushed against the crumpled bill. A single $10 bill, along with the 3 quarters and 2 dimes in her jeans pocket. That was it. That was her net worth. It was Thursday. Payday wasn't until Tuesday. Her phone buzzed in her back pocket. She knew who it was without looking, but she checked anyway while shielding the screen from Rick's hawk-like gaze. Text from Mrs. Gable. "Landlady rent is 4 days late, Sarah. I'm sorry, but if you don't have the $800 by tomorrow morning, I have to change the locks. I have a wait list." Sarah closed her eyes, fighting the nausea rising in her throat. She had a 6-year-old brother, Toby, waiting at Mrs. Gable's apartment. Toby, who had a chronic respiratory issue that flared up in the damp cold. If they were evicted tomorrow, they wouldn't just be homeless. Toby could get sick. Really sick. "I need a miracle," she whispered to the smell of burnt bacon and floor cleaner. "Just a small one." "Bennett, the door," Rick shouted. The bell above the entrance jingled violently as the wind shoved the heavy glass door open. A figure stepped in, bringing a swirl of snow and exhaust fumes with him. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 70s. He wore a coat that might have been expensive once, 20 years ago, but now it was sodden and heavy with water. He wore no hat. His white hair was plastered to his skull, and his skin had the grey, waxy pallor of hypothermia. He didn't look like a customer. He looked like a ghost. The diner was mostly empty at 11 p.m., save for the truckers and a couple of college students nursing milkshakes. The old man shuffled toward a booth in the back, his gait uneven, favoring his left leg. Hey, buddy," Rick barked from behind the counter. "Restrooms are for customers only." The old man stopped. He turned slowly, his eyes watery and red-rimmed. I intend to purchase something." His voice was cultured, surprisingly soft but weak. Rick sneered, looking the man up and down. "Let's see the money first." "Rick, stop it," Sarah hissed, stepping between her manager and the old man. She grabbed a menu and walked over to the stranger, flashing him the warmest smile she could muster, though she felt like crumbling inside. "Sit anywhere you like, sir," Sarah said gently. "Don't mind him. He's just protective of the plumbing." The old man looked at her. For a second, Sarah felt like she was being scanned. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue sharp, despite the exhaustion. "Thank you, my dear," he said. He sat heavily in booth 9. "Can I get you some coffee to start?" "It's fresh," Sarah lied. It wasn't fresh, but it was hot. "Please," he said. "And, do you have soup?" "Something hot." "Tomato bisque. It's actually pretty good tonight." "That sounds wonderful." Sarah rushed to the kitchen. As she ladled the soup, her hands shook. She was thinking about the $800 rent. She was thinking about Toby sleeping on the couch. She was thinking about how she was going to beg Rick for an advance she knew he wouldn't give. When she returned to the table, the old man was staring out the window at the relentless snow. He looked incredibly lonely. "Here you go," she said, placing the steaming bowl and mug down. He ate with a trembling hand. He didn't rush. He ate with dignity, wiping his mouth with the napkin after every few bites. Sarah watched him from the corner of her eye while she rolled silverware. He reminded her of her grandfather who had passed away 2 years ago, the event that had started her downward spiral into debt. 20 minutes later, the old man signaled for the check. Sarah printed it. Total $12.50. She walked over and placed it face down. "Take your time." The old man reached into the inner pocket of his sodden coat. He pulled out a leather wallet. It was cracked and worn. He opened it, his brow furrowing. He dug into the billfold. Empty. He blinked, confusion washing over his face. He patted his other pockets. He pulled out a sleek black credit card. It looked heavy metal. I seem to be out of cash," he mumbled. "But this should work." Sarah took the card. It was cold to the touch. No name on the front, just a silver chip. She walked to the register. Rick was hovering. "If that card declines, I'm calling the cops Bennett. I'm tired of these bums coming in here to get warm and stiffing us." "He's not a bum, Rick. Look at his shoes. They're leather." "They're wet. Run the card." Sarah swiped the card. Processing. The machine whirred. Connection error. "Try it again," Rick said, crossing his arms. She inserted the chip this time. Processing. Declined card. Suspended. Contact issuer. Sarah's stomach dropped. She looked at the screen, then at the old man. He was watching her, his posture rigid. He knew. "Well," Rick asked loudly. It didn't go through," Sarah whispered. "I knew it." Rick slammed his hand on the counter, making the silverware jump. "Hey, pal, you think this is a soup kitchen?" Rick started marching around the counter. "Rick, wait!" Sarah grabbed his arm. "Maybe it's the machine. The internet has been spotty with the storm. The machine is fine. He's broke. I'm calling the cops. That's theft of service." Rick reached for the landline. Sarah looked at the old man. He hadn't moved. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't trying to run. He just looked defeated. He looked like a man who had reached the end of a very long, very hard road. If the cops came, they'd take him in. He'd spend the night in a cell, and outside the temperature was dropping to 5 degrees. Sarah thought of the $10 bill in her pocket. It was breakfast for Toby. It was gas money to get him to school. It was everything she had, but she looked at the old man's hands. They were shaking. "Don't call the cops," Sarah said, her voice firm. "He has to pay Sarah, or are you paying for him?" Rick challenged, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He knew her financial situation. He knew she was desperate. He was mocking her. Sarah's hand went to her apron. She felt the crisp paper of the $10 bill. She felt the coins in her jeans. "If I do this, I have nothing. Literally nothing." She looked at the old man again. He met her gaze. He didn't beg. He just waited. Sarah pulled out the bill. She dug the quarters out of her pocket. "I'm paying for him," she said. Rick stared at the money on the counter. He actually laughed. A short barking sound. "You're kidding, right? You've been begging me for overtime all week, crying about your rent, and you're going to blow your last dime on a grifter." "Just ring it up, Rick," Sarah said, her face burning. She put the $10 and the change on the counter. It wasn't quite enough for the tip, but it covered the bill. Rick snatched the money. "Your funeral, Mother Teresa. But don't come crying to me when you're sleeping in your car." Sarah took the receipt and walked back to table 9. She placed it on the table. "It's taken care of," she said softly. The old man looked at the receipt, then up at her. "You paid." "The machine is acting up," she lied again, trying to preserve his dignity. "Management comped it. Don't worry about it." The old man studied her face. He wasn't buying the lie. He looked at the kitchen where Rick was clearly glaring at them, and then back to Sarah. "You paid with your own money," he stated. It wasn't a question. "It's a cold night," Sarah said, shrugging. "Everyone deserves a warm meal." The old man was silent for a long time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. He scribbled something on a page, tore it out, and folded it. "What is your name, my dear?" Sarah. "Sarah Bennett." "Sarah Bennett," he repeated, testing the weight of the name. "I am Arthur." "Nice to meet you, Arthur." He stood up. He seemed taller now than when he had walked in. The slump in his shoulders was gone. He buttoned his wet coat. "You have done a very foolish thing, Sarah Bennett," Arthur said, his expression unreadable, "but also a very brave thing." He placed the folded piece of paper on the table. "I cannot repay you in cash tonight, but keep this. Do not lose it." "Arthur, you don't have to. Goodbye, Sarah." He turned and walked toward the door. He didn't look back at Rick. He didn't look back at the warmth. He stepped out into the howling wind and the swirling snow, disappearing into the darkness of the parking lot almost instantly. Sarah picked up the paper. She expected an IOU or maybe a religious tract. She unfolded it. It wasn't a note. It was a phone number, and below it a single sentence, written in elegant, old-fashioned cursive, for the one who gave her last, when she had nothing to give. "Yes." "Great." Rick's voice boomed from the kitchen window. "He left you a love note. Maybe you can pay your rent with romance." Sarah shoved the paper into her pocket. She felt a tear slide down her cheek, hot and stinging. She wiped it away angrily. She wouldn't let Rick see her cry. She had $0. She had to walk home, because she couldn't afford the bus now. It was a 3-mile walk in the snow. She grabbed the dirty dishes. The ceramic felt heavy. "I'm an idiot," she thought. Rick is right. I'm a soft-hearted idiot, and now Toby and I are going to be on the street. The clock on the wall read 11:45 p.m. Sarah went about her duties, mopping the floors, her stomach rumbling. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a cold dread. She began to mentally calculate what she could sell. Her TV. It was old, maybe $20. Her winter coat. Maybe $50 at a consignment shop, but then she'd freeze. At 12:15 a.m. the phone in the diner rang. Rick answered it. "Jerry's diner." "Yeah, who?" He paused, his face scrunching up. He looked over at Sarah, his expression changing from annoyance to confusion, and then to something resembling fear. "Yeah, she's here. Sure. Right away." Rick hung up the phone slowly. He looked at Sarah. "Who was that?" she asked, wringing out the mop. "I don't know," Rick said, his voice unusually quiet. "Some guy. Didn't give a name. Said he's coming to see you." "To see me? Was Was it a debt collector? Panic seized her chest. Had Mrs. Gable called a collection agency that worked at midnight? No. Rick said. He didn't sound like a collector. He sounded official. He said, "You need to stay right here." He said it's a matter of national importance. National importance? Sarah laughed nervously. Rick, stop messing with me. I ain't messing Bennett. He said he's 5 minutes out. Sarah stood frozen by the mop bucket. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows in their frames. Suddenly the parking lot was flooded with light. Not the yellow hue of the street lamps, but harsh, blue-white LED beams. Sarah squinted through the window. A black SUV had pulled up, then another, and another. 3 massive Cadillac Escalades with tinted windows blocked the entrance to the diner. The doors of the lead car opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They weren't police. They weren't regular people. They wore earpieces. They moved with the precision of military personnel. And then the back door of the middle car opened. A man stepped out. He wasn't the old man, Arthur. This man was younger, perhaps in his 50s, wearing a trench coat that cost more than Sarah made in a year. He held a large black umbrella. He didn't walk to the door. He waited. Another figure emerged from the car. It was Arthur, but he wasn't wearing the wet grey coat anymore. He was wearing a dry, sharp navy suit. He looked cleaner, stronger. The man with the umbrella held it over Arthur's head as they approached the diner entrance. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Bennett," Rick whispered, backing away from the counter. "What did you do?" The bell jingled. The wind blew. Arthur stepped inside. He was flanked by the 2 security guards. The man in the trench coat followed, carrying a briefcase. Arthur looked around the diner, his eyes landing on Rick, who was trembling, and then shifting to Sarah. The diner fell silent. The truckers had stopped eating. Arthur walked straight up to Sarah. He stopped 2 feet away from her. "Sarah Bennett," he said. His voice was no longer weak. It was commanding. It resonated with power. "Arthur," she squeaked. "You have the paper?" he asked. Sarah nodded dumbly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled note. "Good," Arthur said. He turned to the man in the trench coat. "Mr. Henderson, is everything prepared?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling," the man said. "Sterling." Sarah gasped. The name hit her like a physical blow. Robert Bob Sterling. She knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was an industrial tycoon. He owned the steel mills, the shipping logistics on the Great Lakes, and half the commercial real estate in the Midwest. He was a recluse. Rumors said he had gone mad after his wife died. Rumors said he wandered the city in disguise to escape the paparazzi. You're Robert Sterling," Rick stammered from behind the counter. "Oh my God. Sir, I didn't know the coffee is on the house. Everything is on the house." Robert Sterling didn't even look at Rick. He kept his blue eyes locked on Sarah. "An hour ago," Sterling said, his voice filling the room, "I walked into 5 different establishments in this neighborhood. I pretended to be cold. I pretended to be broke. In 3 of them I was asked to leave immediately. In 1 they threatened to beat me." He paused. "But here I found you." He took a step closer. "Sarah, do you know why I did this?" Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes again. "No, sir." "I am dying, Sarah." The room went dead silent. "I have no children. My wife has passed. I have a board of directors who are vultures waiting to pick my carcass clean. They care about profits, not people. They want to liquidate my charitable foundations to boost stock prices. I needed to find someone who understands the value of $1, but values a human life more. He gestured to Mr. Henderson, who opened the briefcase. It was packed with documents. "I didn't come here to give you a tip, Sarah," Sterling said softly. He pulled a document from the briefcase. "This diner. Who owns it?" "Jerry Mathers?" Sarah whispered. "But he lives in Florida." "Not anymore," Sterling said. "I bought the parent company of this franchise 20 minutes ago over the phone." Rick's jaw dropped. "What? You're fired," Sterling said to Rick without even turning his head. "Pack your things. You lacked compassion when it cost you nothing. I cannot trust you with power." Rick turned pale. You can't." "Get out," the security guard said, stepping forward. Rick scrambled to the back to get his coat. Sterling turned back to Sarah. "I bought the company, Sarah, but I'm too old to run a diner chain. I need a CEO for the Midwest division. Someone who won't let people freeze in the snow." He held out a pen. "The starting salary is $250,000 a year, plus a signing bonus." He pulled a check from his pocket. It was already written. Sarah looked at the numbers. $100,000. "This is for the coffee." Sterling smiled, his eyes crinkling. "And for the trust." Sarah's knees gave out. She didn't fall because the security guard caught her. She sobbed, a loud, racking sob that released years of tension. "But wait," Sterling said, his face turning serious again. "There is a condition." Sarah looked up, wiping her eyes. "Anything." "The money. It comes with a fight. You see, my board of directors isn't going to let this happen easily. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know I gave a waitress the keys to the kingdom. They are going to come for you, Sarah. They will try to prove you are incompetent. They will dig into your past. They will try to destroy you." He leaned in close. "I need a fighter." "Are you a fighter, Sarah Bennett?" Sarah thought of Toby. She thought of the cold apartment. She thought of the $10 she had given away. She stood up straight. She took the pen. "I'm ready," she said. The ride home in the back of the Escalade was silent. Sarah sat on the heated leather seat, her hand clutching the check for $100,000 so tightly that the edges were beginning to dampen with sweat. Mr. Henderson. Robert Sterling's attorney sat across from her. He was typing furiously on a BlackBerry. "We will have a security detail stationed outside your apartment tonight, Miss Bennett," Henderson said without looking up. "Security, why?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I just want to pay my rent and sleep, because by 6 a.m. the press will know, the board will know, and Grant Sterling will know." "Who is Grant Sterling?" Henderson stopped typing. He looked at Sarah over the rim of his glasses. "Robert's nephew. The man who expected to inherit the empire. You just took his crown, Miss Bennett. He's not going to be happy." When the car pulled up to the crumbling brick building where Sarah lived, it looked like a spaceship landing on the moon. The contrast was violent. Sarah rushed upstairs, the check burning a hole in her pocket. She opened the door. Mrs. Gable was standing in the hallway, arms crossed, ready to demand the rent. "Sarah, I told you if you don't have—" Sarah didn't speak. She simply held up the check. Mrs. Gable squinted. Her eyes went wide. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Is this real? Did you rob a bank?" "It's an advance," Sarah said, exhaustion washing over her. "I got a new job. I'm going to sleep, Mrs. Gable. I'll have the cash for you when the bank opens." Sarah went inside. Toby was asleep on the couch, wrapped in 3 blankets. She kissed his forehead. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't cry herself to sleep from fear. She cried from relief. The next morning, Sarah woke up to a sound like thunder. It was the sound of 50 cameras shuttering at once. She peeked through the blinds. The street below was packed, news vans, reporters, and pushing through them a sleek silver sports car. Her phone rang. It was Henderson. "Don't go outside. We are coming up to get you. Wear something professional, if you have it." Sarah looked at her closet. Jeans, t-shirts, 2 waitress uniforms. She put on her best pair of black slacks and a white button-down she used for funerals. It was tight in the shoulders. 10 minutes later, Henderson's security team escorted her and Toby through the mob. Microphones were shoved in her face. "Miss Bennett, is it true you seduced Robert Sterling? Are you a con artist? Sources say you have a criminal record for unpaid debts." Comment. Sarah kept her head down, shielding Toby. They were shoved into the SUV and whisked away to the Sterling Tower in downtown Chicago. The building was glass and steel, piercing the clouds. The elevator ride to the 50th floor made her ears pop. When the doors opened, Sarah wasn't greeted by balloons. She was greeted by a room full of sharks in 3-piece suits. The boardroom. At the head of the table sat a man who looked like a younger, sharper, deadlier version of Robert Sterling. He had the same blue eyes, but where Robert's were warm, this man's eyes were flat and predatory. This was Grant Sterling. "So," Grant said, not standing up, "this is the waitress savior, the $10 philanthropist." The room chuckled darkly. "Sit down, Miss Bennett," Grant said, pointing to a chair at the far end of the table. Sarah sat. She felt small. "My uncle," Grant began spinning a pen in his fingers, "is clearly suffering from dementia. He has appointed you as the interim head of community outreach and the Midwest Division. It is a sentimental decision made by a dying man." "It is a legal decision," Henderson cut in, stepping to Sarah's side. "The contract is ironclad." Grant smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Oh, the contract is valid. But there is a performance clause. Paragraph 14, Section B. Grant slid a folder down the long mahogany table. It stopped perfectly in front of Sarah. "You have 30 days, Grant said. 30 days to increase the profitability of the Midwest diner chain by 5%. If you fail to meet this metric, or if there is any evidence of mismanagement, the contract is void, your bonus is reclaimed, and you will be terminated for cause." Sarah looked at the papers. The numbers were dizzying. "But Robert said he wanted me to bring compassion. He didn't mention profits." "This is a business, Sarah," Grant said, his voice dropping to a silken whisper. "Compassion costs money. You want to save the world, make a profit first. Welcome to the big leagues. Don't trip." Sarah looked around the room. Every face was cold. They wanted her to fail. They were betting on it. She thought of the old man in the rain. She thought of Toby. "I'll do it," Sarah said, her voice shaking but her chin high. "I'll do it." Grant's smile vanished. "We'll see." The first week was a blur of spreadsheets, coffee and panic. Sarah wasn't a businesswoman, but she knew people. She knew why the diners were failing. The food was frozen garbage. The staff was underpaid and surly. The customers felt unappreciated. Sarah made bold moves. She used her budget to switch to fresh local produce. She raised the staff wages by $2 an hour, cutting into the marketing budget to pay for it. She instructed every manager to greet guests personally. "You're crazy," her assistant, a young woman named Chloe, told her. "Grant is going to kill you. You're spending money we don't have." "If the food is good and the staff is happy, the customers will come back," Sarah insisted. "It's simple." And it worked. By week 3, sales were up. Not by 5%, but by 8%. The Cinderella CEO story had gone viral. People were flocking to the diners to support Sarah. Grant Sterling was silent. Too silent. On the Tuesday of the 4th week, Sarah walked into her office to find 2 police officers and Grant waiting for her. "Miss Bennet." Grant said, his face a mask of faux sadness. "I am so disappointed." "What is this?" Sarah asked, dropping her bag. "We ran an internal audit this morning," Grant said. "It seems that $50,000 is missing from the vendor accounts. It was transferred to a shell company." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said. "The transfer was authorized with your digital signature," one of the officers said, stepping forward. "And the IP address traces back to your home computer." "That's impossible," Sarah cried. "I don't even know how to set up a shell company." "We also have a witness," Grant said. The door opened. Rick walked in, the former manager of Jerry's Diner. He was wearing a new suit that fit him poorly. He wouldn't look Sarah in the eye. "Tell them, Rick," Grant commanded. Rick swallowed hard. She asked me to do it. Back at the diner. She said if she ever got power, she'd cut me in. She needed the money to pay off her debts. She told me to fudge the vendor numbers." "Rick," Sarah screamed. "You're lying. Why are you doing this?" "I have the emails, Sarah," Rick mumbled, reciting a script. "I'm sorry. I couldn't go through with it anymore." Grant shook his head. "Embezzlement. Corporate fraud. This voids your contract immediately, Ms. Bennet. And of course the police will need to take you into custody." The officer pulled out handcuffs. "Please," Sarah begged, backing away. "I didn't do this. Toby is at school. I have to pick him up." "Child Protective Services will pick him up," Grant said coldly. As the cold metal cuffed her wrists, Sarah looked at Grant. He was checking his watch, looking bored. He had won. He had planted the money, paid off Rick, and framed her. She was being led out of the building past the same reporters who had cheered for her weeks ago. Now they shouted questions about the theft. "Did you steal the money? Was it all a scam?" Sarah was shoved into the back of a police cruiser. As the car pulled away, she saw Henderson, the lawyer, running out of the building, waving his arms. But it was too late. She spent the night in a holding cell. It was colder than the walk-in freezer. The next morning, Henderson bailed her out. He looked disheveled. "Grant moved fast," Henderson said as they walked out of the precinct. "He's already filed for an emergency injunction to remove you. He's taking over the company this afternoon." "It's a lie, Henderson. Rick is lying." "I know," Henderson said. "But we can't prove it." "Not yet. The digital trail is perfect. Grant has been planning this since the moment you signed that contract." "Where is Robert?" Sarah asked. "I need to talk to Robert. He'll know I didn't do this." Henderson stopped walking. He looked grim. "Robert took a turn for the worse last night. He's in the ICU at St. Jude's. No visitors. Grant has power of attorney now." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Henderson," she whispered. "Why did Robert get sick right when Grant made his move?" The two of them looked at each other. The realization hung in the air like smoke. "Get in the car," Sarah said, her eyes hardening. "We're going to the hospital." St. Jude's Hospital was a fortress. Robert Sterling was on the VIP floor, guarded by private security. Grant's security. "We can't get in there," Henderson said, parking the car a block away. "They have orders to shoot on sight if you approach." Sarah looked at the looming building. "Robert is the only one who can stop this. And I think Grant is doing something to him." "That's a heavy accusation, Sarah. Grant framed me to get the company back. If Robert recovers, Grant loses everything. If Robert dies, Grant becomes the king. You do the math." Sarah opened the glove box and grabbed a baseball cap and a pair of sunglasses. "I used to deliver food to this hospital," she said. "I know the service entrance. I know the shift changes. Sarah, if you get caught, you're violating bail. You'll go to prison for years. If I don't go in there, Robert dies, and I go to prison anyway." She jumped out of the car. Sarah slipped through the loading dock while a delivery truck was unloading linen. She grabbed a discarded pair of scrubs from a laundry cart and pulled them over her clothes. She found a surgical mask. She blended in. She took the service elevator to the 12th floor. The hallway to the VIP suite was quiet. 2 guards stood by the double doors. Sarah grabbed a clipboard from a nurse's station. She walked with purpose. Confidence was the key. If you look like you belong, people don't question you. "Pathology results for Sterling," she mumbled as she walked past the guards. "Hold on," one guard said. Sarah's heart stopped. She turned. "Yes. You dropped this." He pointed to a pen on the floor. "Thanks." She grabbed it and walked through the doors. Inside the suite, the air smelled of antiseptic and decay. Machines beeped rhythmically. Robert Sterling lay in the bed. He looked terrible. His skin was yellow, his breathing shallow. An IV drip was connected to his arm. There was a nurse in the room, but she wasn't wearing a hospital badge. She was on her phone, scrolling through social media. "Who are you?" the nurse snapped, standing up. "Lab technician," Sarah said, her voice muffled by the mask. "Doctor needs a new blood draw." "He just had one." "The sample was contaminated. We need another immediately." Sarah moved toward the bed. She looked at the IV bag. It was clear fluid. But the label? Sarah squinted. She had spent years reading labels checking expiration dates on milk and eggs. The label on the bag said, digoxin. Sarah froze. Her grandfather took digoxin for his heart, but he took a tiny pill. This was a high-dose drip. "That's heart medication," Sarah whispered. "But Robert doesn't have a heart condition. He has lung cancer. That's why he was coughing. If you give digoxin to someone with weak lungs and kidneys, it causes heart failure. It mimics a natural death." "Hey," the nurse grabbed Sarah's arm. "Get out of here." Sarah shoved the nurse back. The nurse stumbled. Sarah ripped the IV line out of Robert's arm. The machine started screaming. "Beep! Beep! Beep! Security!" The nurse screamed. Robert's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Sarah. He was groggy, drugged. "Sarah," he rasped. "Robert, listen to me," Sarah said, leaning close, ignoring the footsteps thundering down the hall. "Grant is poisoning you. This isn't medicine. It's poison." She grabbed the IV bag. She needed the evidence. She ripped it from the stand. The doors burst open. The guards rushed in. "Run," Robert whispered. "Run, child." Sarah threw the clipboard at the first guard and bolted for the bathroom. She locked the door. "Open up!" The guards pounded on the door. Sarah looked around. There was a small window. It opened to a fire escape ledge. We were on the 12th floor. It was suicide, but the door hinge was already buckling. Sarah shoved the IV bag into her shirt. She climbed onto the sink and shimmied out the window. The wind hit her. She was hundreds of feet up. The ledge was narrow, icy. She looked down. The city swirled below her. She looked back. The bathroom door shattered. A guard reached for her. Sarah let go. She dropped to the metal grate of the fire escape landing below, twisting her ankle as she landed. Pain shot up her leg. She scrambled down the stairs, flight after flight, the bag of poison sloshing against her chest. She reached the alleyway. Henderson pulled up tires, screeching. "Get in!" Sarah dove into the back seat. "Go, go!" As they sped away, Sarah pulled out the IV bag. She held it up to the light. "Henderson," she panted. "I have the murder weapon. Now, how do we use it?" Henderson looked at the bag in the rearview mirror. A slow smile spread across his face. "We don't go to the police," Henderson said. "Grant owns half the precinct." "Then where?" "Tomorrow is the shareholders' meeting," Henderson said. Grant is officially accepting the position of CEO. Every camera in the city will be there. Sarah clutched the bag. Then we're going to crash the party. The Sterling Global Shareholders meeting was held in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel. It was a sea of expensive suits, sparkling chandeliers, and polite applause. On stage, Grant Sterling stood behind a podium emblazoned with the company logo. He looked every bit the king he believed he was. A massive screen behind him displayed a graph of projected profits that would be made by slashing the very program Sarah had started. "My friends," Grant's voice boomed smooth as silk. "The unfortunate experiment with Miss Bennet is over. It was a lapse in judgment by my ailing uncle. But rest assured, order has been restored. We are liquidating the charity arm to focus on core competences. Profits will soar." The crowd clapped. They didn't care about the charity. They cared about their dividends. At the back of the ballroom, the heavy oak doors creaked open. Security guards moved to intercept. But the person entering wasn't alone. Sarah Bennet walked in. She was still wearing the dirty scrubs she had stolen from the hospital. Her hair matted her ankle, limping. But she walked with her head high. Flanking her were 4 uniformed officers from the state police, not the local precinct Grant had in his pocket. And beside them, walking with his head down, was Rick. "Stop right there," Grant shouted from the stage, his composure cracking. "Security, remove that woman. She is a fugitive." "I'm not a fugitive, Grant." Sarah's voice rang out surprisingly clear in the cavernous room. "I'm the CEO." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised. The livestream cameras turned away from Grant and focused on Sarah. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah said, limping down the center aisle, "I apologize for my appearance. I've had a rough night. I spent it escaping from St. Jude's Hospital." "She's mentally unstable," Grant yelled into the microphone. "Cut her mic. Get her out." "You can't cut my mic, Grant, because I don't have one," Sarah shouted back. She reached the front of the stage. She climbed the stairs, pain shooting through her leg, but she didn't stop until she stood next to him. She pulled the IV bag from her shirt. She slammed it onto the podium. "Do you know what this is?" she asked the room. The room went deadly silent. "This was attached to Robert Sterling's arm 2 hours ago. The label says, saline. But if you test the contents, as the state police lab is doing right now with the second sample I gave them, you will find digoxin, a heart medication lethal to a man with lung cancer." Grant's face turned the color of ash. That's absurd." She planted it. "She's hysterical." "Am I?" Sarah turned to the wings of the stage. "Mr. Henderson." Henderson walked out. He looked tired but triumphant. He held a tablet. "We have the hospital logs, Grant." Henderson said, his voice amplified by the podium mic. "And we have the nurse. She was detained at the airport trying to board a flight to the Caymans. She's talking. She says you paid her $50,000 to swap the bags." The crowd gasped. The flashbulbs were blinding now. "Lies!" Grant screamed, sweat beading on his forehead. "You have no proof I ordered anything. It's her word against mine." "True," Sarah said calmly. "But we have someone else." She signaled to the officers. They pushed Rick forward. Rick looked up at Grant. He looked terrified, but he looked angry too. "Tell them, Rick," Sarah said softly. "Tell them what Grant told you yesterday." Rick gripped the microphone. He told me to frame Sarah for the embezzlement. He gave me the passwords. And then," Rick's voice broke. "Then he told me to leave town, because once Robert died, he was going to pin the murder on me too. He was going to say I poisoned the old man to cover up my theft." Grant lunged. He actually lunged at Rick, his fists clenched. "Shut up, you moron, shut up!" 2 state troopers tackled Grant Sterling, Before he could land a punch, the podium tipped over with a deafening screech of feedback. The billionaire heir was pinned to the floor, his face pressed against the expensive carpet. Sarah picked up the fallen microphone. She looked at the board of directors who were standing with their mouths open. "The meeting is adjourned," Sarah said. "I have a hospital to get to." 3 days later, the sun was shining on Chicago. The snow had melted into slush, but the air felt cleaner. Sarah sat in a chair next to the hospital bed. This time there were no guards, no poison, and no fear. Robert Sterling was sitting up. He looked weak, but the color had returned to his cheeks. The digoxin had been flushed from his system. His blue eyes were sharp again. "You caused quite a scene, Sarah." Robert rasped, a small smile playing on his lips. "I watched it on the news. Waitress takes down tycoon. You're famous." "I was just doing my job," Sarah said, peeling an orange for him. "You hired a fighter. I fought." "You did more than that. You saved my life." Again. Robert took a slice of orange. He chewed slowly. "Sarah, there is something I must tell you. Something I should have told you the night we met at the diner." Sarah paused. "What is it?" "Do you remember I asked you for your name, and when you said Bennett, I didn't seem surprised?" I guess not. I didn't stumble into Jerry's diner by accident, Sarah. I didn't forget my wallet, and my car didn't break down." Sarah frowned. "I don't understand. You faked it. All of it." "I faked being broke. I faked being cold, but I didn't fake looking for you." Robert reached for his wallet on the nightstand. He pulled out an old black and white photograph. It was creased and yellowed with age. He handed it to Sarah. It was a picture of 2 young men in army fatigues. They were standing in front of a jeep in a jungle. They had their arms around each other, laughing. One was clearly a young Robert Sterling. The other man— Sarah gasped. She ran her thumb over the face. "That's Grandpa," she whispered. "That's my grandfather, Thomas. Thomas Bennett." Robert nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "Vietnam, 1969. We were in the same platoon." "He never mentioned you," Sarah said. "He wouldn't. We had a falling out." Robert looked out the window. "During a patrol we were ambushed. I was wounded. Badly. Your grandfather carried me on his back for 3 miles through enemy fire. He took a bullet in the leg that gave him that limp, the same limp you saw me fake in the diner." "He saved you," Sarah said. "He saved me. And when we got back to the States, I betrayed him." Sarah went still. "How? We wanted to start a business together. Sterling Steel. It was supposed to be Sterling and Bennett. But I got greedy. I listened to my father. I cut Thomas out of the deal before we even signed the papers. I took his ideas. I took the funding. And I left him with nothing." Robert's voice shook. He never sued. He never complained. He just went back to Chicago, worked in a factory, raised a family, and died poor. I became a billionaire on the back of his sacrifice. "Why now?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "Why come to me now? Because I'm dying, Sarah. Really dying. The cancer is real. And when I looked at my legacy, all I saw was Grant, a shark I created. I realized I had a debt to pay, a debt that was 50 years overdue." He reached out and took Sarah's hand. His grip was frail. "I tracked down Thomas's family. I found you. I saw you working double shifts. I saw you struggling to raise Toby. I saw the same honor in you that Thomas had. But I had to be sure. I had to know if you had his heart." "The $10, Sarah whispered. "The $10. Robert confirmed. "If you had turned me away, I would have written you a check for $1 million and left. Guilt money. But you didn't turn me away. You gave me your last dime. You have his heart, Sarah. You have the heart that built this company, not me." Robert gestured to the door where Henderson was standing with a stack of papers. "Grant is in prison. He will be there for a very long time. The board has voted. I am stepping down as chairman effective immediately." "And who is taking over?" Sarah asked. "You are," Robert said, "not as a waitress, not as an interim, but as the owner." "Robert, I can't. I don't know how to run a global empire." "You know people," Robert said firmly. "You know struggle. You know that a business is nothing without the people who work for it. You have Henderson, you have the team. But you have the moral compass. That is what we need." He squeezed her hand. "The company isn't Sterling Global anymore, Sarah. I've already filed the paperwork to change the name back to what it should have been in 1970. Sarah looked at the papers Henderson handed her. Bennett and Sterling Industries. Sarah cried. She cried for her grandfather, who never got his due. She cried for the fear she had lived in for years. And she cried for the future. 6 months later, the sign above the diner was new. It shone in bright neon against the Chicago twilight. Jerry's Diner, a Bennett and Sterling company. Inside it was warm. The heating system was brand new. The smell of fresh homemade tomato bisque filled the air. Sarah sat in booth 9. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a tailored suit, but she still looked like Sarah. Across from her sat Toby, doing his homework on a new tablet. And next to him sat Robert, looking healthier, drinking a cup of coffee. "Excuse me." Sarah looked up. A young man was standing there. He looked exhausted. He wore a thin jacket, and he was shivering. He looked at the menu, then at his pockets, looking embarrassed. I think I left my wallet," the young man stammered. "I'll just go." Sarah stood up. She walked over to him. She remembered the cold. She remembered the fear. She remembered the $10. "Sit down," Sarah said, flashing the smile that had changed history. "The coffee is on the house, and order whatever you want. Because you never know who you're serving. You might be serving an angel, or you might just be serving a human being. And in the end, that's exactly the same thing. What an incredible journey." Sarah started with $10 and ended with an empire not because she was greedy, but because she was kind. In a world that tells us to hoard what we have, Sarah proved that giving is the most powerful investment you can make. She didn't just buy a coffee. She bought her dignity, her legacy, and her future. This story reminds us that true wealth isn't what's in your pocket. It's what's in your heart. You never know what battles the stranger across from you is fighting. Now I have a question for you. If you were down to your last $10, would you have given it to a stranger? Be honest, let me know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps us share these positive messages. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story that inspires. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind always.